Your daughter isn't dead. Daniel Hawk's hands stopped moving. He was still holding the sunflower he had brought for her grave, rain soaking through his jacket, mud on both knees from where he had been kneeling in the dark. And those 4 words hit him somewhere so deep that his entire body forgot how to function for 3 full seconds. He turned around. A boy, 12 years old, soaking wet, standing between 2 gravestones like he had grown there, looking up at a 6'3" Hell's Angel without flinching once. "I saw her," the boy said, "5 days ago. She had a silver feather around her neck, and she was calling your name." If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and stay with me until the very end. Let's find out how far this story travels. The graveyard was empty, except for Daniel Hawk and the dead. That was the way he liked it. 3 weeks had passed since the funeral, and he had come back every single night, not because anyone told him to, not because some grief counselor said it would help him process, but because standing here, in front of that stone, was the only place in the world where his brain went quiet. The noise of the clubhouse, the noise of his brothers asking him if he was eating, the noise of the police calling him with updates he didn't believe, all of it disappeared when he stood in front of Emily's grave. He placed a fresh sunflower against the stone. Emily's favorite. Always sunflowers, never roses. "I don't know how to do this," he said out loud. He talked to her every night. He wasn't ashamed of it. "I don't know how to wake up tomorrow and the day after that and just keep going without you." The rain came down slow and cold. He straightened up, adjusted the collar of his leather jacket, the one with the Hell's Angels patch she used to trace with her finger when she was little, running her tiny fingertip along the stitching and saying, "Daddy, what does the angel mean?" And he'd always say, "It means nobody messes with our family, baby girl." He had failed at that. That was the thought that destroyed him every single night. "You okay, mister?" Hawk turned around slowly. Standing between 2 gravestones, soaking wet, was a boy. 12 years old, maybe younger, hard to tell under the layers of oversized clothes and the grime that had settled into the creases of his face. He had no umbrella, no jacket, nothing waterproof. Just a thin gray hoodie that was dark with rain, and a pair of sneakers with the soles separating from the tops, flopping open like a mouth every time he shifted his weight. Hawk stared at him. "Son," he said carefully, "are you lost?" The boy shook his head. "Are you alone out here?" A pause, then a small nod. Hawk exhaled through his nose and looked around the cemetery. Not a car in the lot except his own. Not a soul within earshot. He looked back at the boy and reached into his pocket. "I've got $20. There's a diner on Clement Street. They'll let you sit inside if you order something hot." "Your daughter isn't dead." Hawk's hand stopped moving inside his pocket. The world went completely, utterly still. He stared at the boy. The boy stared back at him. Neither of them blinked for a full 5 seconds, and the only sound in the cemetery was the rain tapping against the stones and the distant, low rumble of a motorcycle on the highway 2 miles away. "What did you just say to me?" Hawk's voice came out low. Quiet. The kind of quiet that grown men who had ridden with him for 20 years knew to be afraid of. The boy didn't run. Hawk had to give him credit for that. He stood his ground, wrapped his arms around himself to stop the shivering, and looked Daniel Hawk directly in the eye. "I said your daughter isn't dead. I saw her." Hawk's legs moved before his brain caught up. 3 long steps and he was right in front of the boy, close enough that his shadow covered him completely. And Hawk was a big man, 6'3", 240 pounds, a face that had collected enough scars to tell a story without him opening his mouth. Most people flinched. Most grown adults stepped back. The boy tilted his chin up and held still. "When?" Hawk said. 5 days ago." "Where?" "Harbor District, the old cannery, by Pier 9. Hawk grabbed the boy gently by the shoulder, not hard but firm, and he crouched down so his face was level with the boy's. "Son," he said. His voice was cracking and he didn't care. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. My daughter was in a car crash on Highway 17. The car burned. They found remains. I identified them. I stood in a hospital room and I—" He stopped, pressed his jaw tight, kept going. "I buried her. I put flowers on her grave. This grave. That grave right there." He pointed without looking away from the boy's eyes. "So whatever you think you saw, whatever you think you know, you need to be very sure before you say another word to me, because I am not a man you want to break with a lie. Do you understand me?" The boy's chin was trembling. Not from fear. Hawk could read fear, had been reading it for 30 years. But from something else. The effort of saying something true that nobody wanted to hear. "She had a necklace," the boy said. Hawk's grip tightened on the boy's shoulder without meaning to. "Silver, with a feather on it. She kept touching it like she was scared they'd take it from her." The cemetery spun. Hawk let go of the boy and stood up straight. He walked 3 steps away and stopped, pressing both hands flat on top of the nearest headstone. Not Emily's, a stranger's, and stared at the ground and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He did it 4 times. The silver feather necklace. He had given it to Emily on her 18th birthday. He had fastened the clasp around her neck himself, standing in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning before she went to school. "Dad, it's gorgeous!" She never took it off, not once in 4 years. It had not been recovered from the crash. The police told him it had burned in the fire. He had accepted that. He had chosen to accept everything they told him because the alternative was too monstrous to hold in his mind. He turned around. "What's your name?" "Leo." "Leo what?" "Just Leo." Hawk studied him. "How long have you been sleeping outside, Leo?" The boy's jaw shifted. "A while." "Months? Years?" "Since I was 10. Something moved in Hawk's chest. He kept his face neutral. "How old are you now?" 12 and a half. 2.5 years on the streets. 12 years old. He filed that information away and came back to what mattered. "Tell me everything," Hawk said. "From the beginning. Don't skip anything." Leo sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the cemetery, and Hawk stood in front of him, arms crossed, rain running down both their faces. And Leo talked. He'd been sheltering in the cannery district for about a month. It was dry, mostly empty, and the security guards who patrolled the legitimate warehouses rarely bothered with the old condemned buildings further east along the pier. He'd found a gap in the chain-link fence behind Warehouse 4, the one with the broken roof panel, and he'd been sleeping in there for weeks. "About 10 days ago," Leo said, "there were trucks. At night, like 2 in the morning, big panel trucks, no markings. I woke up when I heard the engines." He paused. "I should have just stayed hidden, I know that, but I was curious." "You're 12, Hawk said flatly. "Curiosity is what 12-year-olds do." Leo looked at him with an expression that was too old for his age. "Not when you've been on the streets. You learn to stay invisible." "But you didn't stay invisible that night." "No." He folded his hands in his lap. "I climbed up to the catwalk. There's an old catwalk that runs along the inside of the roof. I stayed flat and I watched." He described what he saw. Men unloading the trucks. Not cargo, people. Young people, hands zip-tied, moving slow, some of them crying quietly, some just staring at nothing. They were put into a sectioned-off area at the back of the warehouse, behind a wall of metal shelving units that had been repurposed as dividers. "And you saw Emily?" Hawk said. His voice was completely flat now. He had switched into a mode his crew knew well, the mode where the emotion went underground and the machinery took over. "I saw a girl," Leo said. "Brown hair, maybe 20, 22. She had a bruise on her face like here." He touched his left cheekbone. "And she was sitting against the wall with her knees pulled up. She kept touching her necklace, and she was saying something, real quiet, like she was talking to herself. What was she saying? Leo hesitated. What was she saying, Leo? She kept saying a name, Leo said quietly, over and over. Dad, 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 like a prayer. Hawk turned away. He stood with his back to the boy for a long moment. His hands were in fists at his sides. When he turned back, his eyes were dry, and his jaw was set, and something ancient and furious had settled into his face like a mask locking into place. Did anyone see you up there? No. You're sure? I've been hiding from people for 2 years, mister. I'm good at it. Did you hear anything? Names, locations, anything they said? Leo nodded slowly. One of the men, he was giving orders to the others. He had a phone on a headset. He said something about a transport. He said, the Portland run leaves Thursday. That was 5 days ago. Hawk's blood went cold. Thursday, that was 4 days ago. If Leo was right, if any of this was real, then Emily had already been moved. Unless she hadn't. Unless Thursday's run had been delayed or changed, or Emily had found a way to slow things down. He looked at the boy with new urgency. Is there anything else? Anything at all? Leo reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something small. He held it out. Hawk took it. It was a strip of cloth. Blue fabric, maybe 2 inches wide and 4 inches long, torn roughly at both ends. And in black permanent marker, in handwriting Hawk would have recognized anywhere in the world, in any condition, in any context, because he had watched it form letter by letter through 16 years of birthday cards and school notes and shopping lists left on the fridge, were 3 words. Help. Pier 9. His hands were shaking. He hadn't let his hands shake in front of another person in 30 years. Hawk made one phone call. Not to the police, not to the FBI, not to any of the 3 detectives who had handed him condolences and closed the file on his daughter inside of 2 weeks. He called Ricky Torres. Ricky picked up on the second ring. It was past midnight. Danny? What's wrong? Get everyone, Hawk said. The whole crew, my place, 1 hour. A pause. What happened? Emily's alive. Dead silence on the other end of the line. Danny, I know what you're going to say. I know how it sounds. 1 hour, Ricky. Bring everyone. He hung up. He looked at Leo, still sitting on the wall, shivering but steady. Have you eaten today? Leo shrugged, which meant no. Hawk took off his leather jacket, the one with the patch, the one Emily used to trace with her finger, and draped it over the boy's shoulders. It swallowed him completely. You're coming with me, Hawk said. I don't know you, Leo said. No, but you came to a biker's daughter's grave in the rain at midnight to tell him something that could get you hurt. That means you know what kind of person you are, even if you don't know what kind of person I am. He paused. I'm the kind that pays his debts, Leo, and right now I owe you everything. He extended his hand. Come on. Leo looked at the hand for a long moment, then he took it. By 12:30, 11 men were sitting in Hawk's living room. They were not small men. They were not soft men. They ranged from 30 to 60 years old, and between them they had accumulated enough tattoos to paper a small house and enough road miles to circle the earth 3 times. They had ridden together through funerals and jail cells and moments of genuine joy that the outside world would never understand. They had stood shoulder to shoulder at Emily's funeral 3 weeks ago. They had wept, some of them openly, without shame, because Emily Hawk had been one of theirs since she was small enough to sit in a motorcycle sidecar and wave at strangers. Now they sat in complete silence and listened to a 12-year-old boy tell them she was alive. When Leo finished, nobody spoke for several seconds. Big Tommy, 6'5", quietest man in the room, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor. The necklace, he said finally. Danny, the necklace, I know. We looked for that necklace. After the crash, I went back to the site myself. There was nothing. I know, Tommy. Because it was never there. said Sal from the corner. He was the oldest in the room, 63, had been riding with Hawk since before Emily was born. His face was like a topographic map of bad decisions and hard lessons, and right now it was drawn tight with something that looked like rage barely contained behind glass. Because she was never in that car. That's what I think, Hawk said. Ricky Torres stood up. He was the youngest officer in the room, 41, and the most connected, the one who had friends in places Hawk didn't ask about. The official report said the crash was caused by a blowout, single vehicle, no witnesses. Case closed in under 2 weeks. He shook his head. Danny, cases don't close in 2 weeks. Not with remains. Not without a full investigation. I always thought it was... He stopped. You thought it was fast, Hawk said. I thought it was suspicious. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to. He looked at Hawk with something like guilt. I didn't want to put the idea in your head that it might be something worse than an accident. It's worse than an accident, Hawk said. The room was silent. Someone staged the crash, Hawk continued. Someone falsified remains or mislabeled them. Someone closed a case that shouldn't have been closed. That means someone with reach did this. Someone with access to the county system and enough pull to make a grieving father bury an empty coffin. His voice didn't crack on that. He was past cracking. And whoever that someone is, they took my daughter and put her in a warehouse on Pier 9, and 5 days ago she was still alive. What do we do? Big Tommy asked. We start with the car, Hawk said. Carl Briggs had worked at the county impound yard for 19 years. He was not affiliated with the Hells Angels. He was not brave or particularly loyal or the kind of man who looked for trouble. But he owed Daniel Hawk a favor from 11 years ago. The kind of favor that doesn't have a statute of limitations. The kind you carry around like a stone in your shoe. And when Hawk called him at 1 a.m. and asked him to meet at the impound lot's south gate in 45 minutes, Carl Briggs got out of bed, got dressed, and drove there without asking a single question. He met them at the gate. He looked at the group of men standing in the dark, and he swallowed hard and he said, Danny, I need you to understand. I pulled the file on that car 6 weeks ago, before you even called me, because something about the case made me uncomfortable. Hawk stared at him. The file had a seal on it, Carl said. Not an administrative seal, a law enforcement hold. Level 3 restriction, which I have never seen on a single vehicle accident in 19 years. His voice dropped. And the car had been logged in under a different case number than the one attached to the death report. Like someone wanted the two records to not be easily searchable together. The men around Hawk went very still. Show me the car, Hawk said. They walked through the impound lot in the dark, Carl's flashlight cutting a pale tunnel through the rows of wrecks and seized vehicles, until they reached a far section near the back wall. A section with its own padlocked gate inside the main yard. This is the restricted section, Carl said. He had a key. He unlocked it without being asked. The car was at the end of the row, or what was left of it. It had burned hot, the kind of heat that suggested accelerant, the kind that doesn't happen from a gas tank rupture alone, the kind Hawk had seen in his life in contexts he didn't advertise. The frame was intact. The interior was gone. The trunk was warped and partially melted. Hawk pulled on a pair of work gloves and started going through it methodically, the way he'd been taught to look for things without disturbing things. It took him 14 minutes. He found the phone in the driver's side door panel, in a gap where the melted plastic of the panel had cooled around an object and sealed it partially from the worst of the heat. The phone itself was destroyed beyond function, but the case was partially intact. Hawk turned it over. On the back of the case was a sticker, partially melted at the edges, the colors gone to gray, but the shape still visible. A mountain, with a small flag at the peak. Emily had put that sticker on her phone case after a hiking trip to Shasta 2 summers ago. Hawk had a photo of her at the summit somewhere. He remembered it clearly. The phone was Emily's, And Emily's phone had been in the driver's side door panel, not in the center console where she always kept it, not in her bag, in the door panel, the place you shove something quickly when someone hands it to you before you get out of a car. Someone had put Emily's phone in this car, after Emily was already gone. He stood up and turned around to face his crew and Carl Briggs and Leo, who had insisted on coming and who had been standing quiet and watchful the whole time. "She was never in this car," Hawk said. His voice was like gravel under a boot. "Someone planted her phone and torched it. She was already gone when this car went off the road." He looked at Ricky Torres. "Someone drove this car off Highway 17 deliberately and set it on fire, and then used Emily's phone to place her in it." Ricky's face had gone pale. "Danny, the level of coordination required to do that, the false remains, the restricted file, the sealed evidence, the accelerated case closure." "I know," Hawk said. "That's not one person. That's not even two or three. That's an operation." "I know. With connections inside the county system. Maybe the police." "I know, Ricky." Hawk's voice was steel. "Which is why we're not calling the police." He looked at every face around him. "We're going to the harbor." Big Tommy spoke up from the back. "Danny, if this is what we think it is, if this is trafficking, there could be armed guards. There could be a dozen men." "Then there'll be a dozen men between me and my daughter," Hawk said, "and I've dealt with worse odds." Nobody argued. Leo tugged on the sleeve of Hawk's shirt before they walked back to the bikes. "She said your name," he said quietly. "I didn't tell you all of it before. When she was sitting against the wall and saying, 'Dad,' over and over," he stopped, steadied himself. "She said it like she still believed you were coming, like she hadn't given up." Hawk looked at the boy for a long time. The rain had stopped. The lot was silent except for the distant moan of a ship horn somewhere out on the bay. "She was right," Hawk said. They rode out before 2 in the morning, 11 bikes cutting through the empty streets like a blade through silence. Headlights off by the time they hit the harbor road. Hawk was in front. He always rode in front. But tonight it wasn't about rank or habit. Tonight his body was operating on something purer and more dangerous than instinct. It was certainty. The kind that doesn't ask questions because it already knows the answer, and the only thing left is to move. Leo was in the back of Sal's truck. Hawk had tried to leave him at the house. Leo had refused with a calmness that was almost unsettling in a child. "I know the layout," he said. "You don't." And the truth of it was so simple and so inconvenient that Hawk had stopped arguing. Ricky pulled alongside Hawk at a red light nobody else was obeying and shouted over the engine noise. "The Portland run was Thursday. Today's Tuesday. If the schedule held, she's still there. If it didn't," he stopped. "It didn't," Hawk said. "Danny, you can't know that." "She left a message on that cloth. She knew someone would find it. She was buying time, Ricky. That's what she was doing." He looked straight ahead. "She's still there." The light changed. They moved. Pier 9 was on the eastern edge of the harbor district, past the working docks, past the fish processing plants that ran overnight shifts, into the dead zone where the city's commerce gave way to rust and silence. The old cannery buildings had been condemned for a decade. The city had plans for redevelopment that had been plans for so long they existed only on paper in offices nobody visited, which made it perfect for people who needed somewhere the city had quietly agreed to forget. Hawk killed his engine 2 blocks out. The others followed his lead without being told. They walked the bikes the last stretch, and the only sounds were the low groan of rigging from somewhere out on the water and the crunch of gravel under boots. Sal moved up beside Hawk. "I count 3 vehicles behind the east fence. 1 panel truck, 2 SUVs, not abandoned, recent." "Guards?" Hawk asked. "I see 2 at the main door. Could be more inside." "There's more inside," Leo said quietly. He had appeared at Hawk's left elbow like a shadow. "Last time there were at least 5. 2 at the door, 2 walking the floor, 1 at the back where they keep the where the people are. The words hit the group like a stone dropped into still water. One of the younger riders, Marcus, made a sound low in his throat. Big Tommy put a hand on his shoulder. Hawk looked at Leo. The back section. You said there was a way in from the roof. The panel, yeah. About 15 feet above the floor. But if you come in loud through the roof, they'll have time to... Leo's jaw tightened. They had weapons last time. I saw them. We're not coming in through the roof, Hawk said. He turned to Ricky. We're going in through the front, fast and loud. Fast enough that there's no time to hurt anyone before we're on top of them. Ricky stared at him. Danny, there are laws. I know there are laws, Ricky. His voice was low and hard. There are also laws against kidnapping, against staging a car crash to fake a death, against whatever is going on in that building. Someone broke every one of those laws and then had the audacity to put a stone with my daughter's name on it in a cemetery and expect me to spend the rest of my life grieving a living person. He paused. So tonight, I am choosing which laws matter more. Ricky held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, pulled back, and started relaying positions to the crew in a low voice. Hawk crouched down in front of Leo. When we go in, you stay behind Sal. You do not move from behind Sal under any circumstances. Do you understand me? And if Emily is hurt, Leo asked, or if she can't walk? The question landed like a fist in the sternum. Hawk absorbed it. Then I'll carry her, he said. That's my job, not yours. You've already done yours. He looked the boy directly in the eye. You saved her just by standing in that cemetery and saying the words. Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, you already did the most important thing, okay? Leo swallowed hard and nodded. Hawk stood up, turned to face his crew, and held up 3 fingers. They went in on one. The 2 guards at the front never had a chance to reach their radios. Big Tommy and Marcus had them face down on the ground in under 4 seconds. Zip ties from Tommy's jacket pocket around their wrists before either man had stopped being confused. No shots, no noise beyond a sharp grunt and the smack of boots on concrete. Then Hawk hit the main door with his shoulder, and it blew open like it had been expecting him. The inside of the warehouse detonated into chaos. A man near the far wall spun around with his hand going for his belt, and Ricky was on him, wrenching the arm behind his back with a technique that had nothing to do with biker culture and everything to do with Ricky's 2 tours of service that he mentioned maybe twice a year. The gun hit the floor and skittered away. Another man ran for the side exit and found 3 more Hell's Angels standing on the other side of it. He actually turned around and ran back inside, which under different circumstances might have been funny. Hawk didn't see any of it. He saw the back of the warehouse, the metal shelving dividers Leo had described. He walked toward them with a speed that wasn't quite a run, but was close. Steady, deliberate. The kind of movement that pushes through everything in its path because stopping is not a physical option. One of the floor guards stepped into his path. Sir, you need to... Hawk walked through him, literally grabbed him by the jacket with both hands and moved him sideways like a piece of furniture, setting him down against the wall with enough force that the man's legs buckled. He didn't hit him. He just removed him from the path. The distinction felt important to Hawk in that moment, though he couldn't have explained why. He came around the corner of the last shelving unit and stopped. The section was larger than he'd imagined. Metal caging, makeshift but solid, divided into individual sections. Young faces everywhere. A girl in the near corner pressing herself against the back of her cage. A young man with dried blood on his temple, staring at Hawk with eyes that had learned to expect the worst from any person walking through that door. At least a dozen people, maybe more, crammed into spaces not designed for human dignity. Hawk's throat closed. He had known, intellectually, that this was a trafficking operation. He had known there would be other victims. But knowing a thing and seeing it are 2 entirely different moments in a person's life, and this was the second kind. Then from somewhere in the middle of the cage section, a voice. Dad? Just that one word, barely above a whisper. disbelieving, like a person testing whether a dream is real by touching the edges of it. Hawk moved toward the sound. He found her in the third section from the right. Emily, 22 years old, brown hair matted against her face, the bruise on her left cheekbone exactly where Leo had described it. She was standing at the front of her cage, both hands wrapped around the bars, and she was staring at him with an expression Hawk had never seen on his daughter's face in her entire life. The expression of someone who had been absolutely certain help was never coming, and had gone on hoping anyway, and could not yet trust that the hope had been correct. The silver feather necklace caught the light at her throat. Emily. His voice broke in half on the second syllable. He didn't try to hold it together. He reached the cage and grabbed the padlock and looked at it for approximately 1 second before applying force that had no technical name but achieved results. And the lock gave with a sharp crack of metal, and the door swung open. Emily came out of that cage and into her father's arms, and Daniel Hawk, biker, Hell's Angel, a man who had not shown weakness in front of another human being since 1987, held his daughter and shook like something that had been wound too tight for too long had finally been allowed to stop. "I knew you'd come," she said into his jacket. "I kept telling myself, I kept saying it, I knew you'd come." "I'm here," he said. "I'm here, baby. I've got you." From behind him, he heard Sal's voice, steady and careful. "There are more here, Danny. We need to move. All of them." He heard Leo's voice too, softer. "She's the one. That's her." Emily pulled back from her father just far enough to look past his shoulder at the small figure in the oversized leather jacket. Her eyes went wide. "You," she breathed. "You were there, in the rafters." Her voice fractured. "I didn't know if I imagined you. I thought I dreamed it." Leo lifted one shoulder in a half shrug that was the most 12-year-old gesture Hawk had ever seen. "You didn't dream it." Emily let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She reached past her father, past the 3 feet of space between them, and grabbed Leo's hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you. Thank you." Leo looked at the floor. His jaw was working hard against something. Hawk watched the boy's face and understood. Leo had been invisible for 2.5 years. He had been the child that people stepped around and refused to see. And for the first time in a long time, someone was looking directly at him and saying thank you like he had value that couldn't be argued with. The boy nodded once, swallowed, held on to Emily's hand. It took 18 minutes to get everyone out of the cage section. Ricky had secured all 5 internal guards. None of them had been willing to test the specific energy that 11 Hell's Angels in a confined space produce. And Marcus had been on the phone since the moment they confirmed victims, not the local police. Ricky had been explicit about that. The FBI field office. A contact of a contact, someone who could be trusted to arrive with jurisdiction and accountability rather than with the same corrupted local infrastructure that had closed Emily's case in 2 weeks and sealed the evidence with a level 3 restriction. They were 19 minutes into the operation when something changed. Hawk was helping a young woman, barely older than Emily, unsteady on her feet after what looked like days of inadequate water, toward the main exit, when Ricky appeared at his elbow with an expression that made Hawk go still. "What?" Hawk said. Ricky glanced at Emily, a few feet away, then back at Hawk. He lowered his voice. "I went through the one guard's phone, the one who had the headset. He had a message thread, encrypted, but he hadn't locked the phone before Marcus got it." He paused. "Danny, the person coordinating this operation locally, the one they call the administrator. The messages give a rank and a department." Hawk's eyes went flat. "Tell me." "Sheriff's Department," Ricky said. "Senior level. The messages reference a badge number." He handed Hawk the phone. "I need you to look at this, because if I'm reading it right, this is the same office that handled Emily's death investigation. The same office that sealed the evidence. The same office that..." That closed the case in 2 weeks, Hawk finished. He looked at the phone. He read the message thread. He read it twice. His face did not change. His face was very calm in the way that volcanoes are calm between eruptions. "That's not an investigator who looked the other way," Hawk said quietly. "That's an investigator who participated." "Yes." Hawk handed the phone back to Ricky. He looked across the warehouse at Emily, who was sitting on an overturned crate with Leo beside her, talking in low voices, her arm around his narrow shoulders. "How many people have seen this message thread?" Hawk asked. "You, me, and Marcus. That's it. Get screenshots. Send them to 3 different places you trust, right now, before anything else." Ricky was already moving. Hawk walked back to Emily. She looked up at him, and for a moment he just looked at her face. The bruise, the exhaustion, the stubborn brightness underneath both that she had inherited from her mother, and that no stage car crash and no warehouse cage had managed to extinguish. "There's more to this than just tonight," he said carefully. "I know," she said. She didn't look surprised. "They knew who I was, Dad, when they took me." She held his gaze. "They weren't random. Someone told them about me. Someone who knew who my father was and thought that having leverage over a Hell's Angel would be useful to them." Her voice was steady and deliberate. She had clearly been thinking this through for weeks. "This wasn't a random abduction. I was targeted." The warehouse was very quiet for a moment. "Do you know who?" Hawk asked. Emily touched the silver feather at her throat. "I heard a name once. They didn't know I was listening. A man on a phone, talking to whoever the administrator is." She looked at her father. The name he used was Garrett. Detective Garrett. Outside, the first distant wail of federal sirens began threading through the dark. Ricky came back at a jog. "FBIETA is 8 minutes. Local law enforcement will respond too. We can't stop that." He looked at Hawk. "If Garrett is local PD, there's a chance he hears the call and comes to the scene himself. To control the narrative." Hawk looked at the door. He looked at Emily. He looked at Leo, who was watching all of it with the calm, measuring attention of a child who had survived alone for 2 years by reading situations accurately. "Then we make sure the narrative is already written before he gets here," Hawk said. He picked up his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call a journalist. He called the one person in the county he trusted completely and who had the specific combination of legal standing and personal fury to do what needed to be done in the next 8 minutes. The phone rang twice, a woman's voice, groggy with sleep. "Danny, it's 2 in the morning." "Judge Harlow," Hawk said, "I need 8 minutes of your time. I have evidence of a law enforcement official coordinating a human trafficking operation. I have victims. I have a badge number. And I need you to understand what you're looking at before the wrong person tries to walk through that door and make it disappear." A pause of exactly 3 seconds. "Talk," said Judge Harlow. Judge Harlow arrived before the FBI did. That was the first thing that surprised Hawk. He had expected her to stay on the phone, to direct from a distance, to use her authority as a circuit court judge the way most powerful people use their authority, as a buffer between themselves and the messiness of real situations. Instead, 7 minutes after he called her, headlights swept through the warehouse's broken windows and a silver sedan pulled up to the entrance with the kind of deliberate speed that said the driver had made a decision and was done reconsidering it. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, and she walked through the front door of a human trafficking warehouse at 2:30 in the morning. In a gray blazer she had clearly thrown over pajama pants, and she looked at the scene in front of her. Bound guards, rescued victims wrapped in jackets and emergency blankets pulled from the saddlebags of motorcycles. A 12-year-old boy in an oversized Hell's Angels jacket, and Daniel Hawk standing in the center of all of it, like a fixed point around which everything else was orbiting. And she didn't flinch once. "Show me the phone," she said. Ricky handed it to her. She read the message thread the way she read everything. Fast, thorough, missing nothing. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes hardened into a particular kind of resolve that Hawk had seen once before, years ago, in a courtroom when a defense attorney had made the mistake of presenting fabricated evidence in her court. She had that same look now, the look of a person who has just identified something that needs to be corrected and intends to correct it. "Garrett," she said. "You know him," Hawk said. It wasn't a question. "He testified in my court 4 times in the last 3 years," she said. "Credible witness, clean record, well regarded." She looked up from the phone. "Twice on trafficking-adjacent cases, both times for the prosecution." Her jaw tightened. "Both times the primary suspects received reduced sentences on procedural grounds. Evidence handling issues." The silence in the room shifted. "He was protecting his own network," Ricky said quietly. "He was appearing to fight trafficking while dismantling the cases that got too close to it," the judge said. "Yes." She handed the phone back to Ricky. "I need original screenshots time-stamped and sent to the State Attorney General's office and to the FBI field supervisor, not just the responding agents. Do it now, before anyone with a local badge walks through that door." Ricky was already on it. Emily had been listening from 3 feet away. She stepped forward. "Judge Harlow," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that made Hawk's chest ache with pride. Because she was bruised and exhausted and had been through something that would have broken most people. And she was still standing up straight and speaking clearly. "I can testify. I heard the name. I heard the coordination calls. I can describe the operation, the schedule, the people involved. I've been memorizing everything for 3 weeks." The judge looked at her with an expression that softened, just slightly at the edges. "3 weeks in that cage and you spent it memorizing evidence?" "My father taught me," Emily said simply, "that if you can't fight back with your hands, you fight back with your head. So that's what I did." Hawk looked at his daughter and said nothing. His throat was doing something inconvenient. Judge Harlow nodded once. "You'll testify. But right now I need you away from this scene before the local units arrive. If Garrett is monitoring the dispatch, he knows something is happening here. He'll come either to assess the damage or to control it." She looked at Hawk. "Can you get her somewhere safe? Somewhere not associated with you?" "My sister's," Emily said before Hawk could answer. "She lives in Marin. Nobody in this operation knows she exists." "Go," the judge said, "now, before the sirens get louder." Hawk grabbed Emily's arm, gently, carefully, like she might be fragile, even though he knew from the last 10 minutes that she was anything but. She leaned into him for just a moment, her forehead against his jaw, and he pressed his hand against the back of her head, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing left to say that the silence didn't already contain. Then she pulled back. "I'm coming back, Dad. I'm not disappearing again." "I know," he said. "Promise me you won't do anything stupid while I'm gone." The corner of his mouth moved. "Define stupid." "Dad." "Go," he said. "Sal will drive you. Take Leo." Leo, who had been a silent shadow at Emily's side for the past 30 minutes, looked up sharply. "I want to stay," he said. "I know you do," Hawk said. "But Emily needs someone she trusts close to her right now, and she trusts you." He watched the boy absorb that. "You're not being sidelined, Leo. You're being given the most important job." Leo looked at Emily. Emily held out her hand. He took it. They walked out together, and Sal moved behind them, and Hawk watched them go until the door blocked his sightline. Then he turned around to face what was coming. The FBI arrived 4 minutes later. 3 vehicles, 6 agents, a field supervisor named Chen, who had the compact, contained energy of someone who had been doing this exact kind of work for a long time and was neither impressed nor disoriented by the chaos she walked into. She took Ricky's briefing while scanning the room, and Hawk watched her face process information with rapid, systematic efficiency. "The message thread," she said to Ricky. "Where did the phone come from?" Recovered from a guard during the breach, Ricky said. One of the men operating the facility. And the breach itself, Chen said, looking at Hawk. That was you. Yes, Hawk said, without law enforcement authorization. Without local law enforcement, Judge Harlow said, positioning herself precisely at Hawk's shoulder, and the weight of her presence in the conversation landed on Chen like a hand on a scale. Given the evidence that local law enforcement at the senior level was participating in the operation, I think you'll find the legality of the entry considerably more defensible than you might otherwise assume. Chen looked at the judge. The judge looked back at her. Something was negotiated in that exchange that had nothing to do with words. We'll sort the legal framework later, Chen said. She turned back to the room. Right now, I want every person in this building interviewed before anyone leaves. And I want the identity of the local badge number on that phone confirmed and flagged for immediate action. That was when the third vehicle pulled up outside. Not FBI, local sheriff's department cruiser, lights on, moving fast. It stopped at the entrance and a man got out alone. No partner, no backup, which was the first wrong note, and walked through the door with his badge already out. Hawk knew him. Not well, not personally, but he had seen the face at the press conference after Emily's accident. He had stood 6 feet from this man and listened to him speak carefully chosen words about a tragic single-vehicle accident on Highway 17 and the unfortunately limited evidence available to investigators. He had shaken this man's hand. He remembered the handshake now with a clarity that made his stomach turn. Detective Paul Garrett was 53 years old, medium build, the kind of face that read as trustworthy in the way that certain faces are specifically constructed to read as trustworthy. Open, tired, sympathetic. He scanned the room quickly, and something happened behind his eyes when he registered the FBI presence. A micro-calculation, a decision being made in real time. He landed on Hawk. "Mr. Hawk," he said. His voice was composed. "I came as soon as I heard the call. I was the lead on your daughter's case, and I wanted to make sure—" "The phone," Hawk said. Garrett stopped. "The guard's phone," Hawk said. "The message thread. The badge number." He watched Garrett's face. "We have it. The FBI has it. Judge Harlow has seen it. The state AG's office received it 9 minutes ago." He took one step forward. Just one. "It's already gone, Garrett. There is no version of tonight where you walk that back." The composure held for 3 more seconds. Then something cracked. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, but in the small, specific way that a real person's composure cracks when they realize they have run out of road. The eyes changed, the jaw loosened, the shoulders dropped by a centimeter. Agent Chen had moved to Garrett's left without appearing to move. Ricky was to his right. Hawk stayed exactly where he was, in the center, not moving, because he understood that the most powerful thing he could do in this moment was be absolutely still. "I want a lawyer," Garrett said. "That is your absolute right," Chen said pleasantly. "Please place your badge and your weapon on the floor in front of you." The room held its breath. Garrett looked at Hawk one more time, and Hawk looked back at him with everything he had not been able to say for 3 weeks. The grave, the stone with Emily's name, the sunflowers wilting in the rain, the nights he had stood in the dark and talked to a piece of carved granite and believed with every broken piece of himself that he was talking to his dead daughter. All of it, right there in his face, unguarded and absolute. Garrett looked away first. He put his badge on the floor, then his weapon. He stood back up and put his hands where Chen indicated, and 2 agents moved in, and it was done. Just like that. After all of it, it was done in a moment so quiet and procedural that the room seemed to not know how to respond to it. Someone exhaled. Someone else made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Big Tommy pressed a fist against his mouth and looked at the ceiling. Hawk walked outside. He stood in the dark by the water and breathed. The bay was moving out there, black and indifferent, the way large bodies of water are indifferent to everything that happens at their edges. He could hear the distant sounds from inside. Voices, radio chatter, the business of people doing their jobs in the aftermath of something terrible. He stood apart from it, just for a moment, just long enough to let his hands stop shaking. He heard footsteps behind him and knew before turning that it was Ricky. "Chen wants a statement," Ricky said. "Tonight if possible." "I know." She also said, off the record, and I mean she specifically said those words, that the way this came together, the screenshots, the judge, the timing, she's seen federal investigations with more resources and more time accomplish less. Ricky paused. She wasn't wrong. Hawk said nothing. "You doing okay?" Ricky asked. "No," Hawk said honestly, "but I will be." Ricky stood beside him for a while in silence, the way that people who have known each other for a long time can be silent together without it meaning anything is wrong. "Garrett ran that case from the beginning," Hawk said eventually. "He was the one who called me with updates. He was the one who explained the rapid case closure. He told me it was best for me to have finality quickly." His voice was very quiet. "He stood at my daughter's funeral." Ricky didn't say anything. "He watched me bury her," Hawk said. "He stood there and watched me bury an empty coffin, and he knew she was alive, and he let me—" He stopped, started again. "He let me grieve her." There was a particular kind of anger that doesn't produce heat. It runs cold, deep, and permanent, like water that has found its way into rock, and is content to wait for the season when it will freeze and split the rock apart from the inside. Hawk had felt hot anger before, many times in many contexts. What he felt right now was the other kind. "What happens to him?" Hawk asked. "If Emily testifies, if the other victims testify, if the message thread holds as evidence, and Chen seemed very confident it would, federal trafficking charges, conspiracy, abuse of office, falsifying a death investigation." Ricky listed them steadily. "Decades, Danny. He's not walking out of this." Hawk nodded slowly. He filed the information somewhere and let it settle. "Emily's at her aunt's," Ricky continued. "Sal texted, she's safe. She has a doctor coming. One of Marcus's contacts, someone quiet who doesn't ask unnecessary questions." A pause. "Leo's there too. Apparently he ate 3 bowls of soup and fell asleep on the couch before anyone could offer him a bed." Something moved in Hawk's chest. Warm, unexpected. "Good," he said roughly. Agent Chen appeared at the door. She looked at Hawk with the direct, unadorned attention of someone who doesn't soften things and doesn't need to. "Mr. Hawk, when you're ready." He turned from the water. The statement took 2 hours. He sat across from Chen and another agent in a cleared section of the warehouse. His warehouse, the one he had come charging into less than 90 minutes ago. And he answered every question with the same flat precision he had been applying to problems his entire adult life. The cemetery, Leo, the impound lot, the phone, the sticker. He laid it out sequentially, clearly, without embellishment and without omission. When he got to the part about standing at Emily's grave for 3 weeks, Chen stopped writing for just a moment. Then she kept writing. When he finished, she looked at him across the table. "The boy," she said, "Leo, he's a material witness. He'll need protection and formal support through the prosecution." "He'll have it," Hawk said. "And housing? If he's been living on the street—" "He'll have that too," Hawk said. His voice was completely certain. "That's already handled." Chen studied him. "Is it?" "It will be," he said. "By tomorrow morning." She held his gaze, seemed to decide something, and nodded. "There's one more thing." She opened a folder. In the message thread, there are references to a second administrator, someone above Garrett in the local network. The badge number we have is Garrett's, but there are messages addressed upward, someone coordinating between the local operation and the interstate network. She looked at him carefully. "That person has not been identified yet." Hawk went very still. "The operation may not be as contained as tonight suggests," Chen said. Garrett is a significant arrest, but if there's a layer above him with the same level of law enforcement access, the same ability to close cases and seal evidence, then the people we pulled out of those cages tonight are still not entirely safe, Hawk said. Until we identify and neutralize the second administrator, Chen said. No, they're not. The warehouse hummed with activity around them. Agents processing, victims being cared for by arriving medical units, guards being transported. All of it purposeful, all of it moving. And underneath all of it, underneath the forward momentum of consequence and prosecution and the machinery of justice finally grinding in the right direction, was this one fact. They had cut off the arm, but the body was still out there. Hawk sat with that for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and sent one text. Not to Ricky, not to the crew, to a number saved under a name that was not a name, just a symbol. A small drawing of a compass that Emily had once doodled on a napkin when she was 9 years old, and he had turned into a contact icon because it made him smile every time he saw it. The text said, "There's a second one. Stay alert. Don't trust anyone near your location you didn't personally put there." He waited. 3 minutes passed. Emily's reply came back in 2 words. "I know." 2 words. That was all Emily sent back, and those 2 words hit Hawk harder than anything else had all night. Not "what do you mean?" Not "who is it?" Not "I'm scared." Just "I know," which meant she had already figured it out on her own, in whatever quiet, calculating space she had been living in for 3 weeks inside that cage, and had been waiting for the right moment to say it, which meant whatever she knew was specific enough that she was certain. Which meant the second administrator was not an abstract threat. It was a name she had already put a face to. Hawk stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped back. "Mr. Hawk," Chen started. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, and he was already walking. He called Emily from outside, pressed the phone hard against his ear, listening to it ring once, twice, and she picked up on the 3rd ring, and the first thing she said was, "Dad, I need you to stay calm." "I am calm," he said, which was technically true in the way that a dam is calm. All the force contained and directed, not absent. "The second administrator," Emily said, and her voice was low and controlled, and it reminded him so sharply of her mother that his chest constricted. "I heard his voice twice, not on the phone, in person. He came to the warehouse 2 weeks ago. He didn't come inside, he stayed near the back entrance, but I could hear him talking to the man running the floor. The accent, the rhythm, the way he talked about the operation like it was an investment portfolio rather than..." She stopped briefly. "I know that voice, Dad." "Who is it?" "I need you to really hear what I'm about to say," she said carefully, "because I know how it's going to land, and I need you to stay calm and trust me." "Emily, who is it?" The pause lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Commissioner Webb." The night went completely silent around Hawk. Somewhere across the harbor, a foghorn sounded, long and low and mournful, and it was the only sound in the world for a long moment. District Commissioner Raymond Webb, 28 years in law enforcement, appointed to the County Commissioner's office 6 years ago, twice named in state integrity reports as a model of clean oversight. The man who had personally signed the letter of condolence to Hawk after Emily's death. A handwritten letter, 3 paragraphs, expressing the county's profound sympathy and its full confidence in Detective Garrett's handling of the case. "You're sure?" Hawk said. "Dad, I heard him speak for 40 minutes through a wall. I know voices. I know his voice." A beat. "He's been on local news enough that I've heard it 100 times. Does anyone else know? Any of the other victims?" "A girl named Rosa heard the same conversation. She was in the cage next to mine. She's been out with the others tonight. She's with the FBI." Emily's voice tightened. "Dad, if Webb finds out we identified him before Chen's team gets to him, he will run. He has the resources and the connections to disappear and never be found. He has access to every database in this county. The moment his name hits an internal police communication, he'll know. Hawk processed this fast. The FBI was good. Chen seemed good. But the FBI field office coordinated with county law enforcement as a matter of procedure. The moment Chen ran Webb's name through official channels, there was a non-zero chance that someone in that chain, with loyalty to Webb, would flag it, and Webb would be gone. I need to talk to Chen without it going through dispatch or any county system, Hawk said. Then do it face to face, Emily said. Right now, and tell her about Rosa. Rosa's testimony plus mine, that's 2 independent witnesses. She can't sit on that. Are you safe right now? Truly safe? Sal is parked outside with Tommy. The street has 2 exits and they have both of them. A small pause and something slipped through the control for just a moment. Something young and exhausted and real. I'm okay, Dad. I'm really okay. Go. Do what you need to do. He went back inside. He found Chen in the back section, overseeing the last of the evidence photography. He walked directly to her, leaned close, and said in a voice low enough that only she could hear, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before it touches a radio, a dispatch call, a county database, or any communication system that Webb has access to. Chen's pen stopped moving. She looked at him. Webb, she repeated, keeping her own voice at the same register. You're saying Commissioner Webb. My daughter identified his voice from 2 weeks ago at this location. One of the other victims corroborated independently. His name is Rosa. She's already been processed through your intake tonight. Pull her before she's transferred anywhere and ask her what she heard. Hawk held Chen's gaze. Webb signed the condolence letter on Emily's case. He had direct oversight of Garrett. He had access to every piece of evidence in the investigation. He is the reason the case was closed fast and sealed hard. Chen did not speak for a long time. Her face went through something complicated and then came out the other side as a flat, professional resolve. If I move on a county commissioner without going through official channels, then you keep your only advantage, Hawk said, which is that he doesn't know you know. She looked at him and he could see her working the angles, running the legal architecture of it in real time, calculating risk and jurisdiction, and the specific career consequences of moving on a commissioner and being wrong versus the consequences of moving through channels and watching him disappear. Find Rosa, Hawk said quietly. Ask her yourself. Before you decide anything. Chen handed her clipboard to the agent beside her, said something brief and directional, and walked toward the victim intake area without looking back. Hawk stood where he was. Around him, the warehouse continued its controlled dismantling, evidence being bagged, guards being transported, the bones of the operation being stripped and cataloged. He thought about Raymond Webb somewhere across the city, asleep or awake, knowing or not knowing that the night had gone sideways. He thought about a handwritten condolence letter, 3 paragraphs. He had read it 4 times. He had kept it in the drawer of his nightstand for 3 weeks. Big Tommy materialized at his elbow. What's happening? You went white. I'm fine. You went white, Danny, and you only go white when something is worse than what I thought it was, Hawk told him. Tommy was quiet for a long time then. Webb, you're telling me Webb. He exhaled hard through his nose. He came to the memorial service. I know. He shook my hand. He told me Emily had been a bright light and the community would feel her loss. Tommy's voice had gone very low and very dangerous. He said that, those words. Tommy, I know. He pressed his hand over his face for a moment, pulled it away. What do we do? We wait, Hawk said. For the first time tonight, we wait. Waiting was harder than any of the rest of it. Hawk had been moving for 6 straight hours. The cemetery, the impound lot, the warehouse, the statements, the calls. And stopping now felt physically wrong. like a car engine running hot being told to idle. He sat against the warehouse wall, forearms on his knees, and watched the clock on his phone move in slow increments that seemed designed to punish stillness. At 4:47 in the morning, Chen came back. Her walk was different, more contained. The slightly increased precision of a person who has just confirmed something they were hoping was wrong. Rosa gave me the same voice identification without prompting, Chen said. She sat down across from Hawk on an empty crate and leaned forward. I asked her to describe what she remembered, and she described a specific phrase he used about the Portland run schedule. I cross-referenced it with the message thread from the guard's phone. She paused. The phrase matches a message time-stamped from a number we hadn't yet identified. I ran the number through federal systems only, nothing county adjacent. Another pause. It's registered to a prepaid, but the cell tower ping at the time of the message puts it within 4 blocks of the commissioner's personal residence. That's not a conviction, Hawk said. No, but it's enough to justify a federal pickup under trafficking statutes before he has a chance to be tipped. She looked at him steadily. I'm making calls in the next 10 minutes. This goes to my supervisor and to the federal prosecutor on duty. It does not touch county infrastructure until Webb is already in custody. She stood up. I wanted you to know before I moved, because without your daughter's information tonight, none of this exists. She walked away and pulled out her phone, and Hawk watched her talk with the contained urgency of someone setting an irreversible machine in motion. Marcus came and sat where Chen had been. He was 20 years younger than Hawk, and normally had the easiest energy in the crew, quick to laugh, slow to anger. But right now he looked like he had aged a decade in one night. I keep thinking about those people in the cages, he said. Some of them look like they'd been there a long time, longer than Emily. I know, Hawk said. Some of them were our age when they were taken. He shook his head. How long does something like this run before anyone notices? It runs as long as the right person is keeping it invisible, Hawk said. Take the right person out and the whole thing collapses. He looked across the warehouse. That's what tonight was. Marcus was quiet, and then, do you think Emily knew it was Webb? Before you told her, I mean, from inside. I think Emily spent 3 weeks in that cage treating every second as an intelligence-gathering operation, Hawk said. I think she identified Webb 2 weeks ago and decided the information was too important and too dangerous to act on without the right moment. He paused. I think my daughter is one of the most composed human beings I have ever encountered, and I have encountered some composed human beings. Marcus made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She gets it from you. She gets it from her mother, Hawk said. At 5:15, Chen came back for the second time. Webb is in custody, she said. The simplicity of it was almost anticlimactic. 4 words, 6 hours of everything the night had been, and it ended in 4 words delivered in the flat, professional tone of a federal agent reporting a result. Hawk closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Opened them. He was home, Chen continued. He hadn't fled. He didn't know. She said it with a professional neutrality that didn't entirely hide a specific satisfaction. When the agents arrived, he was in his kitchen drinking coffee. He asked if something had happened at the harbor, and they told him, yes. She looked at Hawk. He asked about Garrett first, not about the victims, not about the operation, about Garrett specifically, whether Garrett had talked. She let that sit for a moment. He didn't know about the guard's phone. He thought his firewall was Garrett. Garrett was the wall and the door, Hawk said. Yes, and once Garrett was removed, Chen nodded. He was exposed and didn't know it yet. She sat down again, briefly, in a way that suggested she had been standing for so many hours that her body was insisting on a momentary truce. Emily's testimony and Rose's testimony, combined with the phone evidence and Webb's own response at the time of arrest, is a federal trafficking case with multiple layers of law enforcement corruption. It will not be fast. These cases are never fast. She looked at him. But it will hold. Hawk nodded. Your daughter will need to testify, Chen said. Formally, under oath, multiple times, probably over the course of a year or more as the case moves through. I know. It will be hard on her. Emily will tell you herself, Hawk said quietly, that it is considerably less hard than the alternative. Chen almost smiled. Almost. There's something else. She hesitated, and Chen was not a person who hesitated, which made the pause notable. The rapid case closure on Emily's death investigation, the false remains documentation, the sealed evidence, that involved at least 2 people within the county medical examiner's office, in addition to Garrett and Webb. We're looking at how deep that goes. She paused. You may be contacted by investigators who want to know about the state of Emily's remains documentation. Who signed what? Who called you with what information? It may be uncomfortable. It's already uncomfortable, Hawk said. It's been uncomfortable for 6 hours. I can manage uncomfortable. She nodded, stood. Mr. Hawk, I want to say something that is not in my official capacity. He looked at her. What you did tonight, the speed of it, the precision, getting the judge, preserving the evidence before it could be interfered with, making sure the right information reached the right people through the right channels. You functionally ran a better operation than some task forces I've been part of. She paused. I'm not endorsing vigilantism. I want to be clear about that. Understood, he said, but the outcome tonight, 14 victims recovered, 2 significant arrests, a trafficking network dismantled at the leadership level in a single night. That does not happen without what you did in the last 6 hours. She held his gaze. So, she walked away without finishing the sentence. She didn't need to. Hawk stayed where he was until the sky through the broken windows began to lighten. The specific gray that precedes dawn when the darkness doesn't lift so much as dilute, thinning out at the edges until the world becomes visible in increments. He watched it happen without thinking anything organized. His mind was doing the slow decompression that comes after sustained intensity, moving through images and feelings without landing on any single one long enough to examine it. Emily in the cage, Leo in the rain, the feather necklace catching the light, the sound of his daughter's voice saying, "Dad," from across a warehouse and turning 3 weeks of grief inside out in a single syllable. His phone buzzed. A text from Sal. She's sleeping. Leo's still out cold on the couch. Everything quiet. Then, 3 minutes later, a second text from an unknown number that resolved itself when he read the message. Mr. Hawk, this is Rosa. Emily gave me your number. I wanted to say thank you. I have been in that place for 8 months. 8 months. I didn't think anyone was coming. And then the wall came down and you were there. A pause in the text chain then. Emily told me about the boy who started all of it. Please tell him that 8 months of people who didn't think anyone was coming are all saying his name tonight. Hawk read the message twice. He thought about a 12-year-old boy who had been invisible for 2.5 years, who had learned to stay hidden and stay quiet because that was how you survived, who had climbed to a catwalk above a trafficking warehouse out of nothing more than curiosity and conscience, and who had then walked to a cemetery in the rain to tell a grieving biker something true that could have gotten him hurt. He thought about the specific kind of courage that does not come from size or strength or backup, the courage that comes from being alone and small and deciding that what you've seen matters enough to say out loud, regardless of the consequence. He saved Rosa's number. He would show Leo the message in the morning. Not now. Now the boy was asleep, genuinely asleep, possibly for the first time in years in a warm space with food in his stomach, and that was exactly where he needed to stay. Ricky sat down next to him as the gray light kept thickening. Webb's in federal custody, Hawk said. I heard, Ricky said. It's done. For now, Ricky said carefully. The prosecution goes on for a while. I know. Hawk leaned his head back against the wall. But tonight is done. Ricky was quiet. Then, what happens now? With Leo? Hawk didn't answer immediately. He had been thinking about it since the moment the boy had appeared at his elbow in the impound lot with that steady, measuring gaze. Since the moment he had draped his own jacket over the boy's shoulders and felt how thin his frame was underneath it. "He's not going back to the street," Hawk said. "No," Ricky agreed. "I have the room." A pause. Emily's old room is across the hall from her actual room. Has been a storage space for years. He paused again. "I think it's time it was something else." Ricky looked at him, said nothing, nodded once, slow and sure. Outside, the dawn was coming up over the harbor with the indifferent beauty that dawns always have, not knowing or caring what the night before contained, simply arriving because that is what dawns do. The water caught the early light and threw it back in pieces. Somewhere on the legitimate docks, a shift was starting, machinery beginning to move, the ordinary world resuming its ordinary business. Hawk watched the light come up and thought about his daughter sleeping in Marin, and a boy named Leo asleep on a couch, and 14 people in hospitals and shelters who had believed no one was coming and had been proven wrong. He thought about a silver feather necklace and the specific weight of a child's finger tracing stitching on a leather jacket, and the question she had asked when she was 4 years old. "Daddy, what does the angel mean?" He had a better answer now than he'd had then. He drove to Marin as the sun finished rising. Not because he needed to. Sal had texted twice more confirming everything was quiet, Emily was still sleeping, Leo hadn't moved from the couch, but because 6 hours had passed since he had last seen his daughter's face, and his body was no longer willing to negotiate that distance. He pulled up outside his sister Carol's house at 7:12 in the morning, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands on the handlebars, doing nothing, just breathing the cold salt air and letting the silence settle over him like something earned. Carol opened the door before he reached it. She was 55, 4 years older than Hawk, and she had the specific expression of a woman who had spent the entire night awake processing something too large for sleep to compete with. She looked at her brother, and her eyes went red at the edges, and she grabbed him by both arms and said nothing at all for a long moment. "She's okay," Hawk said. "I know she's okay. I sat next to her bed for 3 hours making sure." Carol's voice was rough. "Daniel, she told me what happened. All of it." She pressed her lips together hard. 3 weeks. She was alive for 3 weeks while we... "Don't," Hawk said gently. "We can't go back through that. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Carol nodded, pulled herself straight. "The boy is awake. He was up at 6. He didn't know where anything was, so he just sat in the kitchen very quietly until I came down." She paused. "Daniel, he's 12 years old and he doesn't know how to ask for a glass of water in someone's house because he hasn't been in a house long enough to remember the rules." Hawk closed his eyes briefly. "Open them." "I know." "What are you going to do about that?" "I already know what I'm going to do about that," he said. "I just need to ask him first." Leo was at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice he was holding in both hands like it was something that might be taken away. He looked up when Hawk came in, and his face did that thing it had been doing since the cemetery. That careful, measuring assessment, checking for threat, for angle, for the specific kind of adult intention that experience had taught him to distrust. Then something in him settled, and he nodded once in the way that had become, Hawk realized, Leo's version of a greeting. "You got him," Leo said. "Both of them." "Both of them," Hawk confirmed. He pulled out the chair across from Leo and sat down. "Rosa sent me a message last night. One of the people we brought out." He turned his phone around and let Leo read it. He watched the boy's face as he read. The careful blankness held for the first 3 seconds, and then something cracked through it. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in the way that 12-year-old faces crack when something reaches the part of them that is still entirely a child, the part that survived the streets by being buried. Leo's jaw moved. He put the phone down on the table. He looked at the orange juice. 8 months, Leo said quietly. 8 months, Hawk said. Leo was quiet for a long time. I almost didn't go to the cemetery. I kept thinking, nobody's going to believe me. He's going to think I'm making it up. He's going to think I want something. He looked up. I almost talked myself out of it 4 times on the way there. What made you go anyway? Leo considered this with the gravity of someone who had been thinking about it since it happened. Because she was saying your name, he said finally, and it seemed wrong for someone to be saying someone's name like that and the person never knowing. He paused. It seemed like the worst kind of wrong there is. Hawk leaned forward and put both forearms on the table and looked at the boy directly. Leo, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you answer, I mean it. There is no pressure, no obligation, no catch. Leo's hands tightened slightly around the glass. Okay. I have a room, Hawk said, across the hall from Emily. It's been storage for years, and it shouldn't be storage anymore. I'm not talking about forever necessarily, unless forever is what works. I'm talking about a door with a lock that only you have the key to, and food in the kitchen, and a school within 2 miles, and people who will not let anything happen to you. He paused. I'm talking about what you should have had 2.5 years ago. The kitchen was very quiet. Leo stared at the table. His shoulders had come up toward his ears in the automatic protective posture Hawk had been watching him slowly unlearn since the cemetery, and now they were back, full height, every wall up simultaneously. And Hawk understood that he was watching a child who had been disappointed by adults so many times, in so many specific and damaging ways, that the offer of safety felt more frightening than its absence, because the absence was familiar and the offer carried the unbearable risk of being wrong. I don't need charity, Leo said. His voice was flat. I know, Hawk said. This isn't charity. Charity is when you give something to someone you feel sorry for and then feel good about yourself and go home. He held the boy's gaze. I feel a lot of things right now. Sorry isn't one of them. You walked into a graveyard at midnight and changed everything. I don't feel sorry for you. I feel like I owe you a debt I can't fully pay, and I would like the chance to try. Leo looked up. Also, Hawk said, and his voice shifted, slightly, in a way that allowed for the particular warmth he had been keeping banked and controlled all night to come through. Emily is going to be staying with me while she recovers, and she is going to want you nearby. And frankly, if you're not there, she's going to make me drive her to wherever you are on a daily basis. And she is just as stubborn as I am, so you'd be doing me a significant personal favor. From the doorway behind Hawk came Emily's voice. That is absolutely true, and I will not apologize for it. Hawk turned. Emily was standing in the doorway in Carol's borrowed sweatshirt, the bruise on her cheekbone fading from deep purple to yellow at the edges, the silver feather necklace at her throat. She looked exhausted, and she looked alive, and she looked like herself, completely, irreducibly herself. And Hawk felt the same thing he had felt at the warehouse when she'd said, Dad, across the dark room. That sensation of something fractured, snapping back into place. She looked past her father at Leo. I have been thinking about what I want to say to you since 5 this morning, she said. She moved to the table and sat down beside Leo and turned to face him directly. And I've decided there aren't actually words that are the right size for it, so I'm just going to say the small version and hope you understand the big version is underneath it. Leo nodded cautiously. You are the reason I am sitting in this kitchen, Emily said. You are the reason 14 other people are going to sleep somewhere safe tonight. You are 12 years old, and you did something that trained investigators and a federal task force had not done. And you did it alone, with no backup and no guarantee that anyone would listen. Her voice was steady and clear, and she did not look away from his face. I don't know what your life looks like from the inside, but from the outside, Leo, I see someone whose instincts are better and whose courage is bigger than most adults I have ever met. Leo was looking at the table again. His jaw was working hard. Will you stay? Emily asked, simply, directly, the way she had clearly decided was the only way to ask. The kitchen waited. Leo looked up at Emily, then at Hawk, then back at Emily. "Yeah," he said. His voice came out rough and small and completely unguarded for the first time since the cemetery. "Okay, yeah." Emily put her arm around his shoulders. He stiffened for 1 second, and then he didn't. Hawk looked at his sister over their heads. Carol pressed 2 fingers against her mouth and looked at the ceiling. The rest of the day moved in the particular way that days move after catastrophic nights. Not slow exactly, but thick with consequence, every hour carrying the weight of what the previous hours had produced. Agent Chen called twice with procedural updates. The federal prosecutor's office reached out through Judge Harlow to confirm the timeline for Emily's formal deposition. Ricky sent a group message to the crew with 2 words, "Both down," and the replies came back in a flood that took 20 minutes to stop. But the moment Hawk would return to, the one that stayed, the one that, years later, he would identify as the true turning point of everything that followed, happened at 11:30 that morning. Emily was on the phone with her lawyer in the other room. Carol was making lunch. Hawk was at the kitchen table with Leo, who had asked, with careful casualness designed to hide how much the answer mattered, whether Hawk would be willing to teach him to play chess. Hawk was setting up the board from a set Carol had pulled from a closet, explaining the pieces, when Leo asked without looking up from the board, "Did you always know she was alive? Like in your gut?" Hawk set down the queen. He thought about it honestly, the way the boy deserved. "Something felt wrong from the first day," he said. "But feeling wrong and knowing are different things. Knowing takes evidence. Knowing takes someone willing to say the true thing out loud when it would be easier to stay quiet." Leo moved a pawn experimentally. "She kept saying your name because she believed you'd figure it out." "She believed someone would," Hawk said. "She didn't know it would come through you." "Neither did I," Leo said. Hawk looked at the boy across the chessboard. This boy who had been invisible for 2 years and had chosen one night, in the rain, in a cemetery, to be visible in the most important way possible. He thought about what it had cost Leo to walk up to a stranger who looked the way Hawk looked and say a thing that could have been dismissed, or worse. He thought about the specific mathematics of that decision, the odds Leo had calculated and overridden in favor of something that couldn't be quantified. "Leo," Hawk said. The boy looked up. "That thing you said last night, about why you went to the cemetery, about how it seemed wrong for someone to be saying a name like that, and the person never knowing." He paused. "Hold on to that. Whatever life throws at you from here, hold on to that instinct. That's the thing that makes you who you are. Don't let anyone or anything grind it out of you." Leo looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded once and looked back at the board. "Your move," he said. 3 months later, the trial preparation began in earnest. Garrett pleaded guilty to 12 federal counts in exchange for testimony against Webb. Webb's defense team was expensive and aggressive and completely unable to explain away 2 independent voice identifications, a cell tower record, 14 victim testimonies, and a message thread that the prosecution's lead attorney described to the jury as a masterclass in self-incrimination. The trial lasted 19 days. The verdict took the jury 4 hours. On the morning the verdict came in, Hawk stood outside the courthouse with Emily on his left and Leo on his right. Leo was wearing new clothes, still dark, still understated, still entirely his own choice. And he had gained 8 pounds and 2 inches since November and had opinions about chess openings and was currently pulling a B+ average at the school 2 miles from Hawk's house, which his teacher had described as remarkable given that he had missed 2.5 years of formal education and had arrived with no visible gaps in his understanding of anything. Emily reached across and took Leo's hand, the same way she had in the warehouse, the same gesture, the same grip. The court officer pushed the door open. "You ready?" Emily asked Leo. "Yeah," he said. They walked in together. The gavel came down. The verdict was read. Webb received 43 years. Garrett received 26. Outside after, in the pale winter light, reporters moved toward Emily and toward Hawk and toward the other victims who had come to see it through to the end. Hawk stood back and let Emily speak, because she was 22 and sharp and had been preparing for this moment with the same focus she had brought to memorizing evidence in a warehouse cage. And her words were clear and powerful and entirely her own. He watched Leo watch her. The boy's arms were crossed, his chin lifted, his expression carrying the particular pride of someone watching a person they believed in do exactly what they were capable of. Hawk put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Leo didn't flinch, hadn't flinched at that gesture in months. "She's good," Leo said. "She's the best," Hawk said. Later, when the reporters had dispersed and the crowd had thinned, and the three of them stood in the cold air outside the courthouse steps, Emily reached up and touched the silver feather at her throat. The gesture Leo had described from the warehouse, the same reflexive reassurance. And then she looked at her father, and she smiled. And it was the full, uncomplicated Emily smile that Hawk had been carrying in his memory through 3 weeks of grief and 6 hours of the most harrowing night of his life. And it was exactly as he remembered it. He had buried a stone in a cemetery that would need to come down. He had a conversation scheduled with a stonecutter about removing an end date. He had a sunflower on his kitchen counter that he had bought that morning, Emily's favorite, because some habits are worth keeping after the reason for grief has become a reason for gratitude. And he had a boy across the hall who had taught him, at 12 years old, with no credentials and no authority, and nothing but the stubborn insistence of a conscience that refused to be invisible, that the truest kind of courage is not the kind that charges through a door. It is the kind that walks to a stranger in the rain and says the true thing. That was the story of how Daniel Hawk got his daughter back, and it began and ended with a boy named Leo, who refused to stay quiet, and in doing so, changed everything.